What's up there, Eco Family? Some of you guys might remember my very first video back in July, where I said that Florida does not have an algae problem. It has a nutrient pollution problem. Well, come to find out that common sense went a long way, and now a lot of scientists are agreeing with that. And in fact, there's data that supports it. Whether it be a cyanobacteria that we're calling a blue-green algae inland, or the dinoflagellate known as K. brevis, the red tide out in the Gulf, we are feeding these algae blooms with human sources of pollution, whether that be our septics and our sewage, our lawn fertilizers. Notice there's none here. Our lawn fertilizers, agricultural fertilizers, cattle runoff, all of these things, guys, and of course overdevelopment. But think about overdevelopment. Humans poop in a certain spot. It's called a toilet, and all leads to a place. Well, cattle don't poop in toilets, excuse me. But it's that same scenario. You have to think about how much waste we're producing just with that alone. So we need to be implementing buffer systems in our state. I want to know what you guys are doing. Now that you know that human pollution, me and you, we're causing this. So what are we doing individually to help stop this? You know, one thing that I do is help promote sustainable landscaping, sustainable farming, sustainable ranching. You know, there are ways that we can use plants already available to us to clean out Lake Okeechobee and clean out our intercoastal areas. Duckweed, for example. You know I caught a lot of grief on duckweed because it's invasive. Well, I was coming from an island by Cuba, guys, and little did I know until a few days ago, the invasive duckweed that you're talking about isn't native to Florida. I believe it's from Asia. But there are the 3 native varieties that I'm talking about. And to use a native species wouldn't be to throw that ecosystem out of balance, because a lot of biological controls have blown up in our faces. An example would be Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks introduced what they call Sericea lespedesia. It's a plant that we thought would be good for grazing. We put it in place for erosion control, you know, for some areas where the plants weren't growing. Well, in Kansas, if the deer and the cattle don't eat it after July, it becomes a noxious weed if it doesn't belong there and it's not native. Just the other day, I read how they've actually introduced Rhinoceros caniculus, the European weevil, that feeds off of this. That feeds off the musk thistle, excuse me. But now we're opening up another biological hazard. That musk thistle that's from Europe, another invasive weed, they think, oh, it can be controlled by that European weevil that kept it in check in Europe. Well, what keeps that weevil from disrupting Canadian thistles, prairie thistles, or artichokes, guys? That's a thistle. You know, we could have ruined the American artichoke industry if this weevil gets out of control. That's why I would never suggest using anything that's not native. I suggest using native duckweeds to implement in Lake Okeechobee. We don't have 10 years, guys. I'm sure all of you are seeing that our red tide concentrations are increasing. It's getting worse again. We don't have 10 years to wait for a reservoir that's hopefully going to clean out the water. Maybe 10 years after that. We're talking 20 years till we get a solution. How many of you guys think we have 20 years? Or even 10? Or even 5? We all have to get on that same plane, guys. There are organic fertilizers that we can use, such as bone meals and blood meals that we can implement. You know, there are natural solutions. Just like Baloo the bear said, it's the bare necessities in life, kid. Trust me, that common sense is going to get us far in life. Now that we know the problem, we can make significant changes, and we can demand that our politicians help us with that. It's time for a reckoning, guys. It's time that we all change how we're behaving. We have to reduce, reuse, and recycle. and not just in the blue and the green cans, but in our lawns. It makes sense to. That same phosphate that we're destroying our state for is destroying my state. We're applying these fertilizers like junkies. It's ruining our cation exchange capacities in the soil. And what's our answer? To put more of it on? That sounds like what the heroin junkie would say. You know what I'd tell you? The only person that makes sense to is the junkie and the dealer. So it's a matter of understanding the difference between left and right. Drugs are bad. We all know that. It's in our morality. We know to say no to drugs, but we don't know to say no to some of these things. Now that we do, we can. Keep those chins up, Florida. We got this.